Well, it's a privilege for us today to have Clay Scroggins here, who's the lead pastor of North Point. Everybody knows North Point, of course, but
not everybody, Mark.
Well, almost everybody.
Honestly, I was at my brother-in-law's wedding in Western Massachusetts last weekend. The pastor, it was at First Congregational Church in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, which is where Jonathan Edwards was the pastor in the 1730 something. And the pastor said, "So you're a pastor?" I said, "Yes." He said, "What church?" I said, "It's a church in Atlanta, a guy named Andy Stanley." He said, "I've never heard of him."
No.
And I thought, that is really refreshing to meet a pastor that doesn't know who Andy Stanley is. So, but yeah, most people.
It's also humbling because, here we are at Center for Church Communications, and we're constantly reminded that even though we're ingrained in church world, most of our community are not ingrained in
That's
it.
Right.
And even though we think that we're everywhere, we still have a long ways to go.
Yeah,
but one thing that you have done, Clay, is you've just authored your first book, which is called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge.
That's right. That's right.
And I know for anybody who doesn't know who I am, I'm Mark McDonald. I'm with Be Known for Something, but I'm also the Strategic Communications Catalyst with the Florida Baptist Convention. And I just started that, and I'm now in Jacksonville, Florida, which is exciting in its own sense. But I also have authored a book called Be Known for Something. So I know, Clay, exactly what you've just gone through to get a book out. And a really wise person told me that the title of a book has to be memorable, so it'll sell the book, but the subtitle is the most important part. And your subtitle is Leveraging Influence When You Lack Authority. And as soon as I say that, I just get chills up my spine. But before we get into all of that, tell me a little bit about you. And for those people who don't know who you are, and I mean, Is there anybody?
There's plenty.
You're in Georgia. You have 4 kids, and you have 1 on the way.
That's right. Yeah, I was trained as an industrial engineer. I moved to Atlanta to go to Georgia Tech. Actually, born in Jacksonville, which is where you are now, and I grew up in Alabama. I moved to Atlanta to go to college, and I started attending North Point while I was in college, and God used it in massive ways in my life. I volunteered at our church for about 5 years. I ended up going to Dallas Seminary and met my wife at Dallas Seminary. She is a Texas A&M Aggie, and Aggies are quite proud of being Aggies, just like Texans are quite proud of being Texans. So we graduated from seminary, and we moved back. It was back to Atlanta for me. I did a number of years in student ministry, and then started doing a campus pastor role at one of our other campuses, and then moved to North Point Community Church, which is our original and used to be our broadcast campus. It's not anymore. Now Andy really bounces around to all of our campuses. And I've been the campus pastor here for 2.5 years. And yes, we have 4 kids, and we've got 1 on the way. And yes, we know how that happens. And no, we're not Mormon or Catholic. So,
do you know how to stop it from happening? That's really what we should
do. And we refuse.
Nice. Well, for anyone who hasn't seen this book, and it's been everywhere, I mean, I've been seeing other people that are commenting about it. Congratulations. I mean, there's a lot that goes into writing a book. And I know that a lot of it just kind of stems back. I understand that, I mean, you started as an intern at the church?
Yeah. I actually, my freshman year, I started volunteering. Freshman year in college, I started as a high school volunteer. That summer, we had a short summer. I think our school was transitioning from the quarter system to the semester system. We had 6 or 8 weeks for the summer anyway. And I wanted to intern with our student ministry, but they had already chosen their intern. I missed out on it, and I got a job as the facilities intern. So I was a chair stacker, sweeping out the auditorium. Great. It really was a great great job. And it's a great place to start, honestly. I feel like everybody ought to start stacking chairs.
That's
Honestly.
awesome. Well, it's interesting because it's like going from stacking chairs to writing a book on leadership. I mean, duh, everyone does that. So,
Right. Quite common
but I
career
guess
path.
that before we go too much further, I mean, leadership, I mean, it really is a buzzword. Everybody always
Yeah.
talks about
Yeah.
leadership and those principles. Well, how does Clay define leadership?
Yeah. Well, and let me just, I'll get to that one second. I hesitated so much I thought, why am I writing a leadership book? I don't consider myself a leadership expert. When I submitted this proposal to the publisher, the guy that's in charge of the group that I published with Zondervan, he said, the last thing this world needs is another leadership book, which is always a good encouraging thing to start when you're discussing a proposal that you had submitted. But honestly, as I started digging into this idea, I started realizing that 98% of leadership content is written to senior leaders. And I really feel like I'm sitting in the seat with the 99% going, hey, leadership seems a lot easier when you have all the authority. How do you lead when you don't have authority? So I mean, I don't know if I feel like John Maxwell gets the credit for most quotes. I don't know if he's the one who said it, but I really believe leadership is influence, that really is what leadership is, that it's not title, it's not position, it's not corner office, it's not the parking spot. It is influence. And if you look at the greatest movements in the world, they were led by someone who did not have the title, usually didn't have any title, but certainly not the title of the leader of the movement, but they leveraged influence. They learned how to cultivate influence with the people they were around. And because of the influence that they had, people followed them. So I really like that as my favorite definition for leadership.
I like that, and it's interesting because, I mean, you say you're not a leader, but I mean, you are a leader, right? And
Well,
and
yeah,
well, but you say that you also, as most leaders, we still have bosses, right? So
that's
your
right.
boss is Andy Stanley, which I'm like an Andy Stanley junkie. I
So
mean, I think I have read or listened to everything that he has ever written or said.
me too.
And you refer to him as one of the greatest leaders on the planet, which
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, I agree. But uh, okay, so a lot of people are listening and thinking, oh my goodness, if I just worked for Andy Stanley, I would probably love my boss too.
Sure.
What have you learned from Andy, and how did Andy bring you to this point where you actually could write a book about it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I would, to back up to what you're saying about me saying I'm not a leader. I would say I definitely don't feel like an expert on leadership. I think that's what caused me to hesitate. And then I think I also believe the lie that I'm trying to uncover in this book, that I'm trying to unpack in this book, that we naturally believe that the person with the authority is the leader. I mean, our whole childhood, we've got the teacher in the classroom. She's the leader. The principal, she's the leader. The bus driver, he's the leader because he's got the position of authority. Even our parents are the leader because they have the authority. So I think I realized that about probably a year or two into being a campus pastor is where I really learned it. I have a friend named Justin who gave me this metaphor when we were talking about this one day. But as a campus pastor, it really dawned on me that, oh, wow, they've given me this steering wheel, but it doesn't really work. Much like at the grocery store, there's those carts that our kids ride in these carts. They're shaped as cars, and the kid sits in the grocery cart and has the little wheel and feels like they're driving. And naturally, when they get by the candy aisle, they'll turn the steering wheel, but the cart keeps going straight. And I've had plenty of moments where, even as great as our organization is, I still have a plethora of bosses that have told me what they think I shouldn't do, that have said no to different ideas. And in those moments, we look up at our boss like my kid looks at me going, you've given me this steering wheel, but it doesn't work. it doesn't turn the car like I thought it would. And what I am learning, what I'm trying to learn, is that the steering wheel does work, but it doesn't work with authority. It works through influence, and you have to learn how to cultivate and leverage influence to move ideas forward in an organization, to shift a room. We've all sat in a meeting coming up with the theme of something, or coming up with what is the event going to be like. And we have it in our minds. We think we know what it's going to be, but we don't have the authority to just say, this is the way it's going to be. And so we have to use influence there to move the room. And so that's what this book is all about. That's really what I have been discovering is, yes, Andy is in charge, and yes, he is a great leader, but that doesn't mean that I can't lead. In fact, it means that I'm going to have to use a different lever to lead. I'm going to have to lead through influence. And then finally, what I've discovered is that the best leaders don't actually use authority anyway. The best leaders use leverage even when they use influence even when they have the authority. They don't, the gun of authority works for only a short time. That in the end, the best kinds of leaders, even when they have authority, they use influence. So that's been such a huge part of my journey.
That's awesome. And again, we're talking about this great book. And if you haven't bought it, I mean, you need to run out and get it, because if you're a church communicator, you oftentimes feel like, oh my goodness, I've been given a task, but I haven't been given the authority to be a leader. So
Right.
I guess, Clay, speak into that a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking to majority of the people who are listening to this are actually full-time employees of a church or part-time employees of a church that have been, given the task. So communicate us. And then they sit there thinking, so how do I do that without any leadership?
Yeah, and I would say the people that listen to this, Mark, are really some of the most influential people in the church, that especially with the way the world is changing, I feel like we talk more about how we're going to communicate to our church more today than we did 10 years ago, because it's just the digital disruption is so sincere. It's so great in the church world because of how people are living their lives now. So, but what I lay out in the book is here's 4 behaviors that if you want to figure out, okay, I don't have all of the authority that I think I need, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to sit on my hands and abdicate or throw my hands up in passivity. Instead, I've got to figure out, how do I learn to lead without the authority that I think I need? And I lay out, here's 4 behaviors that I'm trying to do. Certainly there are more than 4 behaviors, but for me, the 4 things that I'm trying to do right now is I'm trying to lead myself. We're all in charge of something. None of us are fully in charge. We're all in charge of something. And what we're primarily in charge of is leading ourselves. And then secondly, it's choosing positivity. Nothing is more powerful than the attitude you bring every day. And the hardest time to do that is when you're handed a decision that you didn't make, but you're being asked to buy into the decision that you didn't get to weigh in on. That is one of the most tricky parts of a job, is they handed me this dumb decision that I would have never made. In fact, if they would have asked me, I would have told them this is a terrible idea, but it's what they went with. And now I'm having to execute this. But the truth is that most ideas work not because they're the best idea, but because everybody gets behind the idea. And so your attitude really will make or break whatever the idea is that has been decided. So lead myself, choose positivity, think critically, which is, to me, couples really well with choosing positivity. Thinking critically is really the art of learning to bring value. It's the learning how to make something better. And most people, most leaders do it naturally, but even if you don't feel like you're good at it, I deeply believe that you can get better at it. You can get better at being present. You can get better at thinking through, how does this connect with the outcome I'm trying to find? What questions do I need to ask? What connections do I need to make to really bring value to whatever the situation is that I've been handed? And it's a skill. It really is a skill to learn to do that. And then lastly, to reject passivity. The easiest thing to do when we're not in charge is to be passive, because we're out of control. That's, to me, it's the best thing about being a boss is you at least have control over the final decision. Now, I'm not saying it's easier. I think it's actually harder to be the boss. The more I have learned that it is harder to be the boss, certainly. But the great thing about being the boss is you do have more of a sense of control. When you're not in charge, you just feel out of control. And when you feel out of control, it's just so easy to get passive. But if you can reject passivity and instead be intentional and be active, it just goes so much further. So those are the 4 big behaviors in the book on how to lead when you're not in charge.
Yeah, I love how you broke it down. I mean, it's like full chapters on each one of those things. And, I guess that we get to talk to a lot of people who are in that church communication role. And I love how you break it down. Okay, you don't feel like you're leading anybody. Well, you're always in control of yourself. So
That's
lead
right. So you
yourself.
are leading someone.
So
Right.
give them some specific examples of how they could, a really practical way to lead themselves.
Yeah, I love. There's a quote that I bumped into that I've been using a lot. It's by a guy named Tom Watson, not the golfer, but the former CEO of IBM. And he said, "Nothing so conclusively proves your ability to lead others as what you do on a day-to-day basis to lead yourself."
Whoa,
Which I love that because it puts the onus on me. If I'm frustrated that I have not been asked to lead more, the best thing I can do is to say, okay, well, then I need to up my game in leading myself. What am I doing to lead myself well today? And leading yourself well, to me, is not easy, but it is our primary responsibility in leadership, whether we have any authority or not. So, there's a ton written on how do we lead ourselves well. I would say the most important thing is, do I have a plan? Most people want to lead themselves, but they don't have a plan to lead themselves well. And it can be as simple as, who am I putting myself around? What am I reading? What am I doing to grow and get better? Which to me requires knowing exactly where I am today. The easiest way to figure out how you need to lead yourself is to find out where you are today. And the easiest way to find out where you are today is to ask other people. So we have a number of questions that we use with our employees to say, hey, it is your responsibility to be intensely and ruthlessly curious about how you're being perceived. So a good friend of mine named Jeff Henderson uses this question. He says, what's it like to be on the other side of me? What if you went and asked 2 or 3 people today, what's it like to be on the other side of me? Hey, you saw me lead that meeting. You saw me run that event. You saw me handle that tough situation. What is it like to be on the other side of me is such a fantastic question. Because
and in the same sense, you almost have to take a deep breath because
Yes,
you
you do.
want people to tell you
Yeah.
the truth. So,
Yes.
give them the ability to really, I want to know the truth, and then
Yes.
take it.
And you have to not be defensive and say, and just say, hey, the goal is for me to listen and learn. You're not any better for not knowing what other people think about your strengths and your weaknesses, that you're only better by knowing. So for me, the greatest thing that I did in my last job transition was I read this in, there's a Harvard Business Review book called My First 90 Days. Anybody who's in the middle of a job transition, I couldn't recommend it more highly. So I was changing jobs. And one of the things that he says to do, I think it's Michael Watkins, he says, you need to ask, our tendency is to just start the new job and just do everything we've been doing, just to keep doing what we've been doing, especially if you got a new job and you've been promoted. But he says, do not do that. You need to stop. You need to pause. You need to turn around and look at your old situation. And you need to ask the people that you worked around, how did you do? What did they like about your situation? So what I did is I just sent a Google form to the 50 people that worked at the church that I was coming from. And I said, what did I do well? What bothered you about me? And what are my blind spots? And unfortunately, they told me everything that I already knew about myself that I hope no one else saw.
Yeah, isn't it crazy how we were so protective of ourselves that we think, oh, nobody else knows this stuff. But ultimately, everyone around us really does see.
Yeah, and it was unanimous. I mean, it was the same 3 pieces of feedback. You're not present in meetings. You don't seem prepared for meetings. When I'm talking to you, I get the sense that you've already moved on and you're thinking about the next thing. And I'm going, that doesn't feel good for anybody. So I got to figure that out. So I'd made some significant changes in my life just by learning that. And I began to lead myself better, because that wasn't anyone's fault but my own. And I wasn't any better for not knowing about it. But once I found out, I was able to go, okay, now I know how to lead myself better. Now I know where my gaps are, where the holes are, where the weaknesses are. So that wherever you are today, whatever you're doing, if you're frustrated about your job, if you're excited about your job, it is your primary responsibility to lead yourself. And there's a lot you can do today to lead yourself well.
Oh, that's so good. Oh my goodness. If people only hear that one nugget, just to try to figure out who you are and how other people perceive you, and then how to lead yourself in the path that you want. You know, your book talks a lot about the idea of, it seems like everyone has the ambition to be a leader. It's like, oh my goodness, I've always dreamed that I'm going to be, the leader, and yet you've not been given the authority to be the leader. So there's that tension point where it's like, I want more, and those 4 steps. I mean, if people just hunker down into those steps, that'd be awesome. But talk to me a little bit about, because your book goes really in depth into that of what to do when you're just waiting for the authority to be given to you.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite, probably the thing that I have, that the most amount of feedback I've been given about this book is around the idea of having a tough conversation with my boss. There's a couple of chapters at the end of the book about when I know I need to go have a conversation with my boss, how do I do that well? And honestly, that happens for me every couple of months. I mean, I think we have a great organization, but naturally, every organization is filled with people. So no matter how good the organization is, it's filled with broken, messed up, insecure, arrogant people, me being the first in line. So it's never going to be easy. But my hunch was writing this book that, hey, most people are going to get through this book and they're going to go, oh no, I need to go have a hard conversation with my boss, because I either haven't been doing it well, or I've got some frustrations that I now feel like I need to go pass this up the chain. And how do I do that well? So I lay out, here's what a conversation guide would look like, which I would say, if that's you today, if you're sitting there going, okay, I've got to have a hard conversation with my boss, how do I have this? This is what I would do. I would start by affirming your boss. It's always helpful to start by saying, hey, I just want to let you know I'm for you. And if you can't say that, you got to figure out how you can say that, because I think it's our duty to be for our boss. I don't think that's an option. I think it's actually a command that God has given us. To all authority is established by God. And if you can't be for your boss, you got to figure out how to at least find it in your heart to be for him or her. And then to tell them that up front, because the most important component of any difficult conversation is safety. And we feel unsafe when we don't feel accepted. And if you can just begin by saying, hey, I just want to let you know I'm for you. I want good things for you. I wish the best for you. I hope I can do whatever I can do to make your life better. That's where I think it's important to begin. And then secondly, to go in with a position of curiosity, to ask. So after you've affirmed, to then ask, and try to ask as many questions. Too often I've already made up my mind on how this is going to go. I've played this conversation 100 times, and I feel like I know exactly what the problem is. But the truth is, there's plenty that I don't know. And I've made my biggest mistakes in relationships when I have assumed to know everything about the situation. But going in with a posture of humility and a posture of curiosity is what really builds a bridge of trust. So after you've affirmed and let your boss know you're for him or her, then ask. Say, hey, I know I've thought a lot about this situation, but I bet you've thought a lot about it as well. I would love to hear what you've thought. And then worst case, they say exactly what you think they're going to say. And then you go, okay, so it is exactly what I thought. But that usually doesn't happen that way. And then thirdly, to acknowledge, to say, okay, I see that there's two sides here. This is what Brene Brown talks about when she talks about empathy that's been so revolutionary for so many people, is to walk around to the other side and say, let me tell you what I hear you saying. I want to acknowledge that this is a difficult, complicated scenario, that it's not just easy, that it's not just a simple situation. And then, and only then, do we advise. But too often we begin with the advice. We begin with, hey, I want to tell you what I think about this situation. And we shoot ourselves in the foot. So with a little bit of preparation, we can go have a much healthier conversation with our boss. We can affirm, we can ask, we can acknowledge, and then we can advise. But only then is it healthy to advise.
Wow. And again, what great advice. And you also go on to talk about challenging up, which is, I think, every person, especially in a church, needs to understand how to challenge up. But most importantly of all, you talk about your love for Chick-fil-A, cookies and cream, milkshakes, which,
that's right.
Again, I'm all for it. And you talk, I think it's Shane Todd that you kind of relate his story, which everyone needs to get the book just to read that complete story. But talk to us a little bit about challenging up.
Yeah. Shane is a fascinating guy that I have met through this process. I've got, being in Atlanta, we've got so many friends that go to our church that work at Chick-fil-A. And so I was telling a few of them about this idea, and they said, hey, have you talked to Shane Todd? Because Shane started selling the milkshake before the milkshake was released nationwide. And the more I started thinking about that, the more it resonated with some things that I've got going on here still, where I feel like I'm ready to pull the trigger on something that my boss is not ready to pull the trigger on. And everybody's got a situation like that, whether it's doing away with bulletins and putting everything on social media, or moving all of our content to YouTube, or anything like that, where I feel like, hey, this feels like the right thing, but I don't know that my boss is ready to do this. Shane's story of how he began to tinker with, experiment with the milkshake before Chick-fil-A had even put the milkshake on the menu is pretty remarkable. And I learned so much just by interviewing him, and hopefully telling his story inspires a lot of people to begin to push their ideas through the organization, and not feel like, too often we feel like, well, I need to leave and go start my own thing because this organization won't allow my ideas. When the truth is, maybe God has put me in this situation to learn how to leverage this organization, to harness this organization, to be able to push my ideas further, to be able to shape my ideas and challenge my ideas, as opposed to just running off and wanting to do my own thing so I can get carte blanche authority to do whatever I want to do. So yeah, I love his story, and I love his entrepreneurship, but I also love his savviness, his organizational savvy, and learning how to navigate a very complex, large organization to be able to try an idea that in the end has become one of Chick-fil-A's highest rated. At one point, it was their highest rated product on their menu, which I would agree it is the best.
The next time I'm in Atlanta, we got to go out for a Chick-fil-A milkshake.
I'd love that.
Well, thank you so much for pouring yourself into this book. I mean, seriously, every person who, and as I was reading it, I was thinking, okay, who doesn't value from this? I mean, because even, everyone always thinks, well, yeah, but someday I'm going to be the leader. But even as the leader, you always feel like someday I'm going to be the leader of the leaders. And like you just keep climbing up this ladder. So I think everybody just could really benefit from this book. Thank you so much, Clay. Before we leave, I guess I want to know, how can people buy the book? Do you have all those details? And if there's any special events coming up that people need to be knowledgeable of?
Yeah. I would definitely say the easiest thing to do would be to go to my website, clayscroggins.com, and you can sign up there to stay in touch. And I'd love to be in touch with you and hear from you. And then also, I think most major retailers are carrying it. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Christian CBD has it. Any of those large retailers, you can find it there. So, but the easiest way would be to just go to clayscroggins.com.
And if people want to follow you on social media?
That is my handle, clayscroggins.com. At Clay Scroggins, I should say. Yeah, it's fortunately, I don't have one of those quite common names where I had to go with the underscore or the. What is your last name, Mark?
Yeah, McDonald.
So there are other Mark McDonalds.
You think? That's why I'm Mark Mac 1023. So,
there you go. That's it, though. Thank you.
I guess it's really important for us to kind of follow along with what you're doing and what you're doing at North Point. I mean, you guys are the kind of the leaders in ministry in this country, and we are watching you, and we appreciate the fact that you're actually writing some stuff down so we can learn from you as well. Finally, would you mind praying at the end of this and praying for the church communicators who are listening right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
Heavenly Father, we just thank you for one that you have designed the world the way you designed it, and you are ultimately in charge, and that is a real blessing. I know there's plenty of days where I feel like I would like to be in charge of more, but I'm just grateful that you are sovereign and there's no one who has more control than you. Yet somehow you've designed and orchestrated the world to allow our decisions to matter, and what we do matters. And the decisions I make today, it somehow affects the outcome of my life, yet you also hold it all together. And God, we can't understand that tension, but we just recognize that it is one and we live inside of it. And so, God, because of that, it makes what we do as humans even more important. So I just pray today, right now, for every person listening, for every situation that they have that's causing them frustration, maybe the complex situations that are causing insecurities or causing fear or uncertainty or jealousy, envy, strife, frustration at their boss, whatever it may be. I just pray that you would allow them to number one, listen to your voice above every other voice, and that they would hear today that they're a son, that they're a daughter of the King, and they would just rest in that. And then also they would seek to have great relationships. God, if they're in a position where they do not love their boss, that you would allow them to love their boss. God, we can't love anyone that we can't lead anyone that we don't love. And I just pray that you would allow them to find it in their hearts to love their boss. And then lastly, God, I just pray that you would give them wisdom, a lot of wisdom to know how to navigate their situation at work, to be able to bring more, to be able to have more impact at their local church and their organization, God, for your kingdom. And I just ask you, as I've asked you all along, that this book, that these ideas would bring more health to organizations, which ultimately makes you look as great as you really are. We should be the best run organizations in the world. So I just ask you to bring a lot of health to these, what sometimes seem like broken situations. And God, we just thank you for Jesus, who he let go of his title so that he could give his life for us. And we just pray all this in his name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Clay, for spending so much time with us today. And we're going to be following along. And thank you again for writing the book. You have a great day.
Thanks, Mark.